Good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today on the Roundup for Wednesday, March 24th, 2021, we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last few days. It's obviously a very interesting time on U.S. college campuses, with many still in the throes of hybrid or completely online learning, and looking forward to the fall term, where we may be returning to more of a semblance of normal and what that might look like back on college campuses, whether there will be still some vestiges of hybrid learning that will be maintained after return to normal is achieved. But we'll get to that in a few more minutes and over the coming weeks and months. But before we do, for those that are not familiar with the Roundup, each week we look at the news stories that have piled up over the last few days, and we look for themes in some of the story lists that we see repeated or in different news stories. And we each week look at our newsletter that comes out on Mondays. That's all the SMIE news fit to share. And if you're wondering what SMIE means, it's Social Media and International Education. That's the name of the company, SMIE Consulting, and that's how we design all of our efforts to bring those two worlds together in looking at the news stories that are impacting what we do on university campuses in international education and the implications for us moving forward. So our newsletter that comes out on Monday, 9 o'clock every Monday morning in your inbox, free of charge. If you'd like to subscribe, or if you aren't already, go to smieconsulting.org/subscribe. Enter your email address and a couple other pieces of information. We'll get you the next newsletter. Until then, we'll drop the link to this week's edition of the newsletter into the comments section on the Facebook page. For those watching live on Facebook, thanks so much for being a part of the journey each week. We're really glad to have your feedback here on the Roundup live, but also look forward to those of you who watch on repeat, either on Facebook or on our YouTube channel, and those obviously that make us a part of your listening week on podcasts by downloading us and subscribing to our podcast. We appreciate that, and you add a lot of value to what we do here at SMIE Consulting. So let's jump right in. First question of the day, of the week, is what needs to happen to reopen U.S. consulates? Now, this is a big deal. We've talked about this at many points over the last year, since the pandemic forced U.S. consulates and embassies worldwide to shut down operations. We saw, beginning over the summer last year, we saw some of those consulates begin to open up their doors again. Initially, it was for emergency appointments only. And for students that were looking to start in the fall, that meant going emergency for an emergency appointment, usually only within a month of the start date on your I-20s. Whereas normally students can apply up to 4 months before their start date. So that pushes many students back to May to start applying for their visas. And last summer, it was chaos. 90% of U.S. consulates and embassies around the world were still closed during peak visa season from June, July, and August. And that meant those students that even had I-20s, were ready to come, didn't have the opportunity to apply for a visa to come. Some couldn't come as new students because their campuses were fully online, and that wasn't allowed by DHS regulations. Others simply couldn't get a visa appointment because consulates and embassies were closed. And you look at what's happening now. You've had 40,000 students or so as of the fall IIE snapshot survey from 700 top institutions that enrolled international students. They indicated about 40,000 students have deferred that we're deciding to come next year, or fall 2021. You had another set of about 20% of enrolled international students that ended up on campus this fall that enrolled in universities but did not come to campus. They've been studying remotely from the home country for the last year, for the last 8 months or so. Those students will be hoping to come to campus finally to get that on-campus experience, and that's ideally what they're paying for in the end. And then you all have all these new students that are going to have been applying this year in increased numbers this year compared to 2020, and are going to also be applying for visas. And if you get to a situation this summer where embassies and consulates are still primarily closed, over half of them are still closed, probably like 60% or so worldwide, including the top consulates in China and India, our top two sending countries, which have remained virtually closed. You are going to run into a situation where you have almost the equivalent of 2 years of students, international students from peak countries that are looking to send their students here to the United States that are going to be applying for student visas. And if it's emergency only, there's no chance on God's green earth that all those students are going to be able to get appointments in time and to come to begin studies this coming fall. It's just not going to happen. So as a result, what's happened, we've talked a couple news stories about this over the last month or so. We've had, as has been the case over the last few months, ACE, the American Council on Education, served as sort of the umbrella kind of higher ed association for 30 plus up to 40 other associations, international, many of them international ed associations or associations that have strong international components. They've been putting together various letters addressing some of the things that they would like to see happen in the coming months to help smooth the way for an international education renaissance here in the United States after what we've been through the last 4 years. And this letter, the most recent letter, is sent jointly to Secretary Blinken at the Department of State and Secretary Mayorkas at DHS. And the gist of this this letter from all these associations to the two secretaries involved in visa policy, either initial visas or current status visas for international students, make the case that March and April are critical months for the processing of visas for the fall semester, that students are making their choices as to where to go, where they're going to study, make their final decisions as to where they're going to study. And that process starts in April. They've been admitted. Now they need to get all their financial documents in so that institutions can issue the I-20s that they'll then need to go and apply for those visas. So what this letter is prompting, and something we've certainly been talking about here, that we need in order for fall 2021 to be what it should be, and that is a banner year in terms of, compared to the last four, in terms of new international students coming in. Now, state and DHS are the ones that are going to be most directly involved in this. State, obviously, are the places, State Department, consulates and embassies overseas, that's where those visas get issued for initial I-20s and visa renewals. They've addressed the visa renewal process, and in many countries, the in-person interview is no longer required due to the pandemic. So that's one positive step for students who need to renew their visas. Now, that will hopefully decrease the backlog of interview requests at the embassies and consulates themselves. But you have the issues of new students that will be applying to embassies and consulates that are still largely closed. So the push that is made in this letter is, first, the State Department and Homeland Security can ensure the timely, efficient processing of visa applicants and work authorizations for international students and scholars. And that also means prioritizing for DHS work authorizations for OPT, and that the challenge is both State Department consulates out in the field in terms of visa fees that they charge are what they use to budget for the next year in terms of staffing and all those things. They've obviously taken big hits. Same thing with DHS because the numbers have been down, not certainly for OPT filing fees and all that. Those numbers have actually gone up. But for Department of State in particular, because they're so dependent and they're cost self-sustaining or cost, there's no budget for these operations for consular affairs to have certain staffing at every embassy and consulate, that they use the money that they bring in from visa fees to pay for those things. And DHS likewise, SEVIS fees pay for SEVIS. And because numbers have been down last year and potentially again this year, that it has impacted staffing to process applications at CIS. So a lot of other multiple factors that have combined for a perfect storm in terms of what could happen again this fall when it comes to visas. So we're talking about assurances. One of the other things the letter is asking for is that there are waiving the in-person interviews also for new students, and that's probably a security question that will be a bridge too far for most in the State Department. That the Secretary does have the authority, Secretary of State does have the authority to waive that in-person interview if the waiver is in, quote unquote, the national interest of the United States, or is necessary as a result of our unusual or emergent circumstances. So they're asking for a waiver of this, the in-person visa requirement, that would not, certainly would be in the national interest and would not be necessary. So they're making a strong case there. And frankly, if an in-person interview is not required, that would certainly make the administrative burden much simpler on the consulates and embassies to allow that. In talking to colleagues who work at state, have been overseas at posts, talking about what I asked why embassies and consulates in China and India aren't opening yet. And he seemed to think it certainly wasn't going to be pressures on control on who gets access to embassies and consulates from the host country like India or China. It was more in terms of in China, it may be a matter of staffing, that embassy and consular officials haven't been allowed back into the country to resume their duties, so they don't have these embassies and consulates staffed enough yet, or haven't been allowed to staff them because people that we send out to work in other countries at our U.S. consulates and embassies are only allowed in at the invitation of the government, the host government. And if that's not happening in China, that they're not letting our embassy staff back in unless they were to go to a quarantine center, and many colleagues have that was a no-go. A Chinese government-run quarantine center, that was a no-go for. I think that was one of the things that was proposed earlier on. That was certainly not going to happen from a U.S. perspective, and you can read into that what you want, what you will. Certainly, that kind of breach of protocol in the interest of protection of quote-unquote health and safety wasn't going to be tolerated from the U.S. perspective, so there may be still some bureaucratic wrangling that needs to be done there to allow our staff back into China to staff those embassies and consulates fully so that they can resume routine visa services. If you look in India, I'm not sure what the case is there. They're obviously in Hyderabad. They're going to be building a brand new consulate there that's going to have, I think, triple the number of windows that they have for visa interviews. So they're ramping up staffing-wise. It's not going to be ready for this fall, but maybe late in the summer it might be. But there's some real concrete issues that are prohibiting reopening of consulates and embassies. So we're not sure what they are. It's maybe different in every country, but certainly our entry and availability of U.S. consulate staff in those countries to run the visa services that they need to, that's probably one of the major factors that is prohibiting a full expansion to where we need to be. Now, you look at our visa process compared to other countries, the study permit process in Canada, which still has some bureaucratic challenges, but the British system and the Australian system and even New Zealand are much more streamlined. For British farms out their visa processing to a third party company. They don't require the in-person interview. So these are things that other countries will have a distinct advantage of us. And certainly that's what happened with the UK this fall. They had, because they weren't requiring the in-person interviews, that had this third party doing their visa processing, they were able to get students in country. And that in much larger numbers than we were able to do here in the United States. So that's a big deal. So we'll see where this letter goes from ACE to if it impacts and moves DHS and state off their perches a little bit and gets them into the weeds here and dealing with a lot of these issues that need to be sorted out right away if we're going to have a fall that is what we hope it should be. Now that's it for our first question. There'll be more on that, I'm sure, as we go through the next couple of months. That will become mission critical to see if the fall is even going to be realistic to get in the number of students we need to get in. But let's shift gears to kind of the front end of the admissions process, which is related to a new scandal that we talked a little bit about over the last week or so. There's another, a latest admissions scandal that has an international twist to it. And will that latest admissions scandal, international style, change us? And I say this, will it change us for a number of reasons. You look at what happened with Varsity Blues, and certainly domestic admissions offices took the brunt of the criticism on process and procedures at U.S. colleges and how students get admitted and all of that. But you look at what these were students that were applying with not necessarily fraudulent credentials, but certainly well-enhanced resumes or CVs of their activities that they were involved in, and having high-paid admissions consultants greasing the wheels for them at certain institutions to get them in. And just kind of paper over the cracks of what was really a challenge, or what was really dishonest about that whole process. People have gone to jail. There's a new Netflix documentary that's coming out soon on this Varsity Blues scandal on the domestic side, because it was so Hollywood that there were Hollywood actors involved in the process in terms of the cover-ups involved. But what this one that we're talking about here. Two individuals in Southern California were basically international students paying them for help in air quotes, on everything that they were paying for guaranteed admissions in the eyes of certainly the people, the parents of these students. And in return, the services they received: essays, doctored transcripts, or of high school or college records. Someone else took their TOEFL exam or SAT exams and helped with their visa applications. So the result, there were 19 students that were paid thousands of dollars and were admitted to top universities: Boston College, Boston University, Columbia, New York University, Orange Coast Community College, maybe not top school, but University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, USC, and UC campuses at Irvine and Riverside. So some of these universities were also part of Varsity Blues. So what we're talking about here is the lengths to which these students paid for the services that guaranteed them getting in to these top schools, goes above and beyond, frankly, what a lot of the Varsity Blues individual students purported to have in their backgrounds that got them admitted. It was more the money greasing the wheels that got those students in, not necessarily these two individuals that in California that basically did the work, had others do the work for the students, and presented as the individual students' work. So most students are not, most of the colleges involved certainly aren't talking about the different issues involved for legal reasons, obviously. But what I'm fairly confident in saying is this could be just the tip of the iceberg. There have been times in my career when my spidey senses were going off when things didn't match up necessarily, and we call out students if we thought there was something missing. I certainly wasn't always at a top-tier school where that might be happening, but you could tell. There was a time where in I think it was probably 2004, 2006, somewhere in that range, 2008, where I was doing application reading for a college, and a more selective college. And there was one year, this second year I was doing it, they had just a swathe of applications from Nanjing in China. And there were transcript issues I saw. There were essay issues, extracurricular issues I saw with with at least 3 or 4 transcripts from that school where actually I was seeing just as one admissions reader, international admissions reader, that I raised issues with the staff, and they said, well, we're not really, we don't have the resources to really follow up on these, so we're not going to do it. So, but it became very clear to me after a year or two later, I hear stories about this particular school from colleagues who work in China, that they have agents that run students there, and these agents will do everything for those students, prepare doctor transcripts, phony transcripts, and other students will take their SATs and TOEFL exams. So that's always been there. To have this kind of level of duplicity being pulled off fairly easily with these institutions points to a couple things that I see as challenges for international admissions offices in particular. Is one, knowledge of the education systems and protocols and expectations in different countries, and second, having credential evaluation services, either that you have in-house or that you farm out to third parties for whether it's an ECE, whether it's a WES or other service providers that do this. Are you confident that the transcripts you get, that the test scores you get, and some of the test authenticity issues are certainly not on the institutions, but will certainly be on the testing companies that allowed students who are not the people who are on the registration papers to actually take the tests for them. So test security has been an issue for many years, but that's something that certainly College Board's dealt with, ETS has dealt with in the United States here, but other companies, IELTS around the world deals with this too, and how do you verify the authenticity of the individual that's taking the test is the name on the paper. So this is something that will continue to be an issue, but being able to verify and the time that's needed to do that properly in a system that is geared towards churning out decisions, that is geared towards reading seasons that are more concerned with other things in the application than what's on the transcript necessarily. In all circumstances, if the GPAs are high enough, they're not going to really question it, even though there may be very strong reasons why it should be questioned. So I think there's a lot that needs to happen in this area. And the 2 links I'll be posting to the Facebook page for these are, one is an Inside Higher Ed article about this new admissions scandal, and the second is the actual indictment that is from the Central District of California. So it's a federal issue, and one of the things that is involved here, because it's federal, it alleges visa fraud. That use surrogate test takers and guaranteed foreign student admissions into colleges. So this is something that's going to have some legs, I think, because this could be just the tip of the iceberg, as I mentioned earlier, that I'm not surprised this is happening. And when Varsity Blues first broke a couple of years ago now, almost, I made the statement then that I certainly think is validated now, that that internationally there's things far worse than what happened in Varsity Blues that are happening internationally in terms of the admissions process and how students get into colleges and universities, because it's just such a more complex world and a less known world for most universities and colleges that spend the time to evaluate student applications. So we'll see where this goes, but I'm certainly thinking that this will have some significant legs down the road certainly as far as U.S. colleges adjust their admissions policies and such. So we'll see what happens with that. We'll certainly keep you posted on it. Final question of the day: can intensive English programs bounce back? Now, for my colleagues here in the United States, my heart goes out to you, because I know how much you've struggled. Whether you're a campus-based intensive English program or you're standalone, you've had to scramble like crazy, not only the last 4 years, but in particular since the pandemic struck. your life has been a living hell. On many of your schools, there's been such dramatic drops that was happening even before the pandemic, with the drops in Brazilian and Saudi scholarship students that normally had been filling your classrooms for 4 or 5 years or more. But when those go away, you need to replace those with other sources. So did you move into more immigrant opportunities? For those that are campus-based, did you have even the opportunity to do any of that in terms of your clientele, in terms of who you could reach out to, partnerships you could make, all of those? The one thing that has been a challenge, I think, in some countries, and the two that I'll profile are Australia and the UK, since I haven't seen relevant data for US English language programs recently. But the English language programs in Australia, you see they're at a 14-year low in 2020. They had a year-on-year fall of 43.3% in terms of enrollments, and that's only because of continuing students that were already there, or had just gotten in recently before the borders closed. That they're at their lowest stage. That you see. Visa requests were down 74.6% for English study in Australia last year. You see just drops across the board, and that's significant, and doesn't look like there's any light at the end of the tunnel for this yet, just because it's such a fluid situation. But in Australia, with the reluctance to reopen anytime soon, you see. Unless these individuals were already in the country, they weren't getting visas to come. Even if they could travel and get in, they weren't going to be able to get in. What you see, obviously, universities have been able to save some of their new students that they were expecting last fall to still enroll. They were able to do that because they had the option for online courses, online courses towards degrees. But for English language programs, it's a much different dynamic, and it's to do this, to teach ESL virtually is not the same, not nearly the same as it is in person. And in some cases, it wasn't even allowed for students to do virtual English language classes in some of these countries, in Australia, and I think the UK might be also in this boat. So in the UK, we saw a loss at English language teaching centres, a loss of £590 million. 91% of employees have been affected at English language teaching centers. Half have lost their jobs. So a lot of those affected. 91% of people in the English language program had their jobs negatively affected last year, and over half losing their jobs. So I would say the numbers in the U.S. would have to be comparable to that. In terms of significant job loss, and as well as closing of programs even. So this is something that is a real challenge for English language programs, and you gotta hope that when the borders reopen, that there will be opportunities to come. I know in the U.S. there was already concerns that English language programs weren't getting the opportunities that they would in other countries, like in Canada or the UK or Australia, because the way the visas were processed for English language only, unless it had previously, if it didn't have a government scholarship attached to it, there wasn't a very strong likelihood from certain countries of students getting in for just English language, even though they might be conditionally admitted to a university for degree studies, that because they can't be issued an I-20 for both, they can only have an admission letter or an I-20 for the English language program if they're not fully accepted into a degree program. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on, but I do think it's one that will have has already had a devastating impact on the field, frankly, and I don't see until borders reopen that changing. But certainly with expansion of immigrant communities into the United States through our southern borders recently, maybe there's opportunities there. Certainly other immigrant groups that will be coming in. More refugees will be coming in this year because of changes in policy, reversing the Trump policies on asylees and immigrants. So I think there's going to be more of that, more opportunities there. On the student front, degree-seeking student front, pre-university ESL programs, it's going to be a struggle for some time, I'm afraid. But we'll stay positive as long as we can. And if you're in the IEP programs, you are in my heart, and certainly understand where you're coming from on those things. So that's what we have for you this week on the Roundup. I do wish you all the best of luck in the coming days as we're into spring and the weather starts turning warmer, and we're looking to get out more. For those who are already getting their vaccines, their first and second shots, congratulations on those. Hopefully there'll be a return to normal for you sooner rather than later. And we'll certainly keep you abreast of all the different impacts our changing world is having on our field. So until next time, we wish you the best of luck and have a wonderful day. Cheers.